Welcome to Session 2 of Telling Your Story, a series that's developed to help artists find ways to use stories to sell more art. Session 1 is available at is.gd/story1. My name is Mark Lowe. I'm the director of Integrity Shows. For information about our events, please go to integrityshows.com. So last week we started the discussion, and the big point was, how does a story help to sell art? Then we got into three different types of stories. This is just one way of separating it into a value story, an artist story, and a customer story. So the value story, if you have something like this, the value is astronomical. But if you put it like this, the value goes way down. So what am I saying? Even if you're the best artist in the world has ever had, the story is still a big part of the sale. Yeah, you could say, well, the other one was much more expensive because it was larger and an original and all that, but that's all part of the story, I believe. That is the artist story. This is by Basquiat. If you didn't know that, you might not be as excited about it, but I believe it sold at $18 million at auction recently. And then the customer story, reminds you of what we talked about. This was a photo of Anthony Brass with one of his customers. And the beauty of this is by taking these photos every time he has a sale, it's not only him putting the photos on his Instagram and such, but the customer is also posting those photos and encouraging their friends to shop. So this is a little bit more of the detail that we talked about. The homework was for everybody to come up with a prompt, something that we could use to start a story. Now, I know some of you wrote a whole story, and that's getting a little bit ahead of where I want to be. I'm just interested really in a sentence or two from people. Today's work is going to be finding your stories, which we did a little bit of last time, and then the parts of a story. Then next week, my wife will be here, and she'll be working with us on editing stories, which is the session I call Getting to Carnegie Hall, because that involves practice, practice, practice to get the story working the way you want it to. What I'd like you to do, if you don't mind, is maybe find a piece of paper and a pen, because we're going to come up with some things that'll be helpful a little bit later. Thought we'd go back to the three kinds of stories again, and I'd give you a prompt for each one. My neighbor buys her art at IKEA. What can you tell her so she wants to buy your art instead? What makes your art more special, more valuable than the art from IKEA? So just think about, a couple of words that we could develop into a story a little bit later. And if you guys want, anybody wants to throw theirs in, just go ahead and unmute yourself. Remember, we're just looking for a couple of words or one sentence here.
Well, I would say that anyone's artwork should be unique and original and one of a kind if it's the original piece.
Okay, so what your story is, part of your value of your work is that it's unique and one of a kind.
Handmade.
Handmade.
Yep.
I think that's a good one for nowadays.
Mark, mine is that as a fine art photographer, my photos are unembellished.
Okay, so they're getting the actual view.
Hello.
Hi.
I would say you will be the only person that has this thing. There's only one.
Pamela, you get a silver star because you're putting it from the customer's point of view too. You're making them feel special, which I think is helpful. When you start doing storytelling, you want to get right into the person's head if you can. Okay, let's try a prompt for the artist story. So TV7 is looking for a good story about an artist to help promote the show. I've got to suggest an artist to them that's going to do a great job and be exciting and bring people down. So think about 1 or 2 words or a sentence about why we should consider having you on television.
Storyteller through my art.
Okay. Marta says that because she's used to telling stories through art, so that's a good thing. That'll help.
My art is iconic from Detroit's history.
Yep. So it relates to the other things that the station's likely to be interested in. Every show is always looking for an artist that can do a great job presenting on television.
Oh, just trying to unmute here. I wasn't all the way set up.
Sure.
I use a lot of stones and semi-precious gems from Michigan.
Yep.
And that always seems to be a good opening for a conversation with people.
Sure.
Because it seems like a lot of people go up north and they bring back Petoskey stones or whatever, and I always seem to get into lengthy conversations with people about the stones, and then that leads to talking about their place up north or vacations they've been on. So that's always been a really good hook for me to engage customers.
So Michael and Deb both brought up things that were specific to the location, Michigan or Detroit, and that helps because television stations are always interested in that, as are, frankly, most people are more interested in their location. And then Marta, you mentioned that you're a great storyteller and that there's stories in your work, which I think also helps a lot.
I do make painting with a lot of history of the person I paint, so that is kind of, you know, an open book in testing matches.
Yep. So another thing that Michael did that was helpful was he talked about turning his story into their story. And anytime that your story can be part of your customer's story, you've got to win.
Yeah, I actually had a couple stop in and talk to me. The next day they came back and the gentleman brought rocks from his cottage up north to give me. I made a connection on even that level, which I think is, pretty extraordinary. So that taught me I'm not selling jewelry. I'm kind of selling me, if that makes sense. So.
Well, that makes a whole lot of sense. And I'm very much there with you. The third kind of story is the customer story. Let's see. There we go. So here's the prompt for that one. My father-in-law is coming over tonight. He does not understand art. What should I tell him about this print, or this painting, or this piece that I bought from you? Make me feel good about buying your art when he talks to me. The theory that I have that goes with that is part of the reason people shop in galleries is because there's a curator there who's going to tell them what to buy that their friends are going to approve of. But if they shop at an art fair, they have to go with their own gut feeling and their own opinion.
Yeah.
So it becomes our job to make sure that they feel that their friends are going to think they made a good choice.
Yeah. I had another customer, couple walked in, and the gentleman, he said, we were just in K Jeweler and we saw something similar, and why should I buy from you when I can buy from them? So I said, you can go to K Jeweler and you can wear something that maybe 2,000 or 3,000 other people are wearing. I said, all of my work is one of a kind, and they all have a story, and it's made locally as opposed to who knows where K gets their stuff from. So it's your choice, obviously, but here's why I charge what I charge for my work, as opposed to what you're going to find in a mass market jewelry store.
So he was kind of twist on that, Michael, to make it more into the customer story. Is my customers buy from me because they know that they're not going to see anyone else wearing that same piece.
Exactly.
Which I think is saying everything you had said, but you're putting it from the customer point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of common sense. But so they left, and I figured, I write that sale off. Well, the next day, the wife came back and by herself, and she bought the piece. So hopefully, the message got through. I think she was sold that day. I think he was just having kind of a bad day. He didn't want to be there, I guess. I don't know.
Anybody else have a short sentence?
I would start, in those situations, I would always start with a question, like find out what, like in a suggestion, talking to your father-in-law, find out what intrigues him about the artwork, so that's where you can start to talk where they're referencing it from.
Sure.
And move in their direction. That's how I come about it.
Yeah, I love that too, Peggy, because we talk about storytelling as a way to connect with the other people. Their story helps us connect even more.
I've got a story where a customer, the wife bought the piece. It was a 16-foot triptych out of Aspen, and the husband hadn't seen it. I kept them upstairs while I was hanging it, and he got a little, oh, this is the grand unveiling, and go, yeah, it's grand unveiling. I'm a ski patroller. I'd carry you over my shoulder, but you're too big. And he squared himself to the piece in this big media room, and he quietly said, "Oh my God." I asked, "Could you repeat that?" He said it again. Then I asked him, "Okay, can I quote you?" And he just nodded his head. He was blown away.
So that's a perfect story to tell if somebody was saying, "Hey, I'm looking at this, I love it. I'm a little worried about my husband." Well, this is what happened in the past when a situation like that. I love that. Angelo, did you want to say something here?
Some of the buyers, they would come to my studio, and then they would invite me to their home, and I would have like dinner. They would love to say that, hey, artist, he was here. They'd be able to say, hey, I knew that guy. And it's sort of like you're like a celebrity, and they love to be able to mention your name and say, hey, I know him or her,
Yeah, and people may not believe it, but most folks don't really know many artists. We're the exception on that, of course. Riffing on what Angelo said, numerous artists over the years have told me that if somebody can't make up their mind between 2 or 3 pieces, they see that as an opportunity. And rather than saying, hey, I better get them to make up their mind, they try to schedule a time in the person's home to bring those pieces so they can see them in place. And what I'm told by more than one person is, in general, if you go to their home, you're not going to sell 1 piece, you're going to sell 2 or more pieces. I was a salesman door to door with home improvement stuff, trying to make it through college. And one of the things they told us to do, if you're offered something, accept it. i.e., you walk in, they say, would you like a glass of water? Yes. Why? Because that makes you a guest instead of a salesperson. So if you do go to somebody's home, be there as a guest. If you're there as a salesperson, they're never going to relax.
It's good. I like that.
Let's get into this, finding your stories. So I'd like you, from what we were just doing, to come up with one subject, title, or first sentence that you want to use today for the rest of this workshop. Take a few minutes. And again, we're not looking for the whole story. Please keep it short, just a sentence, a subject, or a title, so that if possible, you can relate that. As we talk about the parts of the story, you can relate that to the story that you're going to start with. So there's a lot of different ways to look at the parts of a story, and I'm going to show you 3 ways. 3 is the magic number, right? So all of them involve the bones of the story. And you as artists know the anatomy, so they've got the bones down, and then they can work around that. One way of doing that is the beginning, the middle, the end. Well, a lot of jokes are really stories. So I came up with the line, a rabbi, a priest, and a psychic walked into a bar. The bartender says, what would you like? the psychic says, I'm leaving, this doesn't end well. It's a complete story because it's got the beginning, the middle, and the end. Another is problem resolution and new normal. This is one that they use in business stories a lot. I went to college, and in my 10th year, I was thinking, you know, this is getting to be problematic. I'm just loving everything I'm doing. I was taking management, children's theater, fine art, ceramics, no specialization. So I went and talked to my advisor, and he said, oh, wait, yeah, Mark, you graduated. You got the arts management degree. And what's happened with that is now that advisor and I have had a pretty good relationship. So I ended up working with many of his wonderful artists that were also in a similar situation. And it also allowed me to work with many wonderful artists throughout. So you got the problem, the resolution for the problem, and what the new normal is. So this is challenge, reaction, resolution. So this is going to be also an example of why you need more than the bones. There's a woman drowning, so somebody saved her and moved on. Not much of a story, but if I tell you that these two gentlemen, monks, are walking by the river, and one of their most important things is you would never, ever touch a woman because that would be impure. But they see this woman in the middle of the river drowning. Well, one of the monks goes in there, picks her up, carries her out, makes sure she was okay, and then starts walking again. The other monk gives him a funny look, continues to walk. Finally, 3 days later, the second monk says to the first, how could you do that? Do what? How could you touch that woman? Who? The woman that was drowning. Oh, you know, I carried her for 20 feet. You've been carrying her for 3 days now. Without the embellishment, it's nothing. But before you can do the embellishment, you have to have the bones. So visual tools are something you're all used to. Color, shapes, perspective. These are all visual tools that you use in telling stories in fine art. And then most of us have also got some knowledge about verbal tools, the tools that we can use in storytelling. So just a reminder, nouns are people, place, and things, the hero, the motivator, the city, the setting. If you don't have one of those or a couple of those, you don't have a story. Adjectives, that's the most important one for artists, I believe, because that's what helps us create our own stories a little bit better by using a little bit different adjectives than maybe what an engineer would use. And the verbs are important. Those are the action thing. So what I'd like to do before we leave today, though, is have you fill this out. So taking that story we wrote earlier, what's the main thing about that story? And then does it fit one of the three categories? It doesn't have to. So when you're done with that, go to the next one, which is, again, the bones. Create the outline. What was the situation in the beginning? What happened? And what's the new situation or the resolution? Then the third part is adding the detail. Like that story about the woman drowning in the river. It was a complete story with no detail, but I think it was a better story once we added some of the embellishments to it. So what are the things that tickle our senses on the story? Or other details that you can remember. It makes it more real. The assignment for next week is to work with this worksheet and try telling a story one time. And please make it really bad. Intentionally screw it up, because that way you don't have to put too much pressure on yourself.
But it's a real story, or it's a story that we are making? It's not the story of our life, no?
If you do a story of your life, that would be the artist's story.
Yeah.
So you would only want to put enough in there that would intrigue somebody. I want to buy this from Marta because, wow. So why would they want to buy something from you? Because of who you are. That's where the story of your life is helpful. If it's something that's going to turn them off, it's not a helpful story at all. So anybody want to share what their subject is? And let's leave the rest of it for next week, if you don't mind, because I really want to be able to spend some time on each person's story. And what the plan is for next week is my wife, Vicki, will be along too. And We hopefully will have time to go over with each person some ideas about editing their story to make it more effective, more clear, more short, whatever the story needs.
Yeah, I got an email from a customer once who said, in very short brief, said that every time she looked at the painting, it brought her joy. And
Wow.
so that's kind of what I'd like to embellish on, so to
I
speak.
love that as a starting point, sure.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
And I could see that with your work too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you.
I would say I want to start mine with, I used to be married to an artist, and I always wondered what kind of art would I do if I had the opportunity, and kind of bounce off of that.
Sure.
It gets better after that.
And then anybody else want to share their headline?
Yeah, I work in fine art media, and mostly it's ski areas, ski related. So I make the physically inaccessible accessible.
Wow. Okay. You're a magician.
No, I'm a risk taker.
Okay.
I want to work on the customer story. I think I've done pretty well on the value story and artist story, but somehow what you've taught us in the past week or so has really helped me learn that the customer's processes in this is just as important. So I've got a lot of things going on in my head that hopefully will come together.
Cool.
On that.
Well, the nice thing is next week we'll all be able to work with each other a little bit to fine tune the stories. This is our next week's schedule. We're going to tell the stories. We're going to try and keep them under 3 minutes. And my hint to you is create an outline so that it's easier for you to keep track. Sort of like that outline I used for the story about the monks who saved the woman. All it had to have was those 3 points. And that way I couldn't forget any of the steps to it. And then my wife, Vicki, will be here next week. And as you're working on your stories, there's a reminder I'd like to give you. This is by Ernest Hemingway. The first draft of anything is shit. It took me a long time to believe that because I used to think, okay, I'm done. This is beautiful. This is wonderful. It's ready to go. And frankly, rarely is it ever.
Yeah, that's right.
So keep that in mind as you're working on your stories, that the first draft is shit. It's also the hardest part. But once you've done that, then you can do the work to make it into a helpful, beautiful thing.
I want to add something. And I'd like to tell you that your story got more beautiful because I had a problem. I have sometimes an understanding problem, and my imaginations make another different his story. Yep. So I thought it was monkeys, not monk. So it was easy.
Okay.
I was seeing like a cartoon story. Yep. So sometimes the imagination changed the whole tale. And that is what happened with a lot of artists, that our imagination, it's more powerful than what we are listening.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a good point too, is that we need to leave some room for the customer to create their own version of the story.
I was going to relay a story about a person looking at my painting, and I had told them, or I interpreted what I painted. Mm-hmm. They seen something else in the painting, and that sort of discouraged them from buying it. Yeah. Sure. And I don't talk about my work when I'm selling it. I just let them see what they see. If they see a cat in it, then there's a cat in it. Yeah. If they see something else, then whatever it is that they see, because I don't want to, I don't want to discourage them, because this is what they see. That's their vision of what it was. Work can change. It could be a balloon one day, and it can be a mountain the next day. Mm-hmm. So it's different things to different people.
Well, what do you see in it?
That is a good part.
because whatever they see in it is the right answer.
Yeah, I always would say it's whatever you want it to be. Whatever you want it to be.
Yep.
Of course.
Please have a imperfect story ready to share.
Good.
Very nice job, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Appreciate it.